When was the last time you woke up and already knew exactly why you were getting out of bed? Not to check your phone, not because the alarm went off, but for a real reason. Something specific waiting for you outside. Most people over 60 in the West cannot answer that question without pausing. And that pause, that gap between waking up and having a reason, turns out to be one of the most measurable predictors of cognitive decline that researchers have found in 50 years of studying the oldest brains on the planet. The Okinawa Centenarian Study has tracked more than 1,000 people who have lived past 100. When researchers compared those brains to Western brains of the same age, the gap was not subtle. Okinawans have one-third the dementia rate of Americans. One-third. Not a different diet, not a different gene pool, but a different morning. In the next 20 minutes, you are going to understand exactly what happens in that morning, why it works at a biological level, and how to rebuild it wherever you live. And at the end, I'm going to tell you the one ingredient that no dementia prevention article ever mentions, the one that makes the other pieces actually work. There is also something from the Okinawa Gruening Brain Scan study that I want to save for mine at 19 because it reframes everything. What the researchers expected to find and what they actually found were completely opposite. And that gap explains more about cognitive aging than almost anything else published in the last decade. Stay with this. Let me start with what most people get wrong. If you have read anything about dementia prevention, you have seen the same list. Stay mentally active. Do crossword puzzles. Download a brain training app. Keep the mind sharp. That advice is not completely wrong, but it is aimed at the wrong target. In Okinawa, where some of the sharpest 90-year-old minds on the planet live, not one person in the research cohort was doing brain training apps. No puzzles as a strategy, no supplements stacked on the counter. A 2025 scoping review published in Lifestyle Medicine analyzed 86 separate studies on cognitive aging. The single strongest behavioral predictor of dementia risk had nothing to do with mental exercises. It was the presence or absence of what the Japanese call ikigai, a reason to get up in the morning. People with a clear daily purpose had a 36% lower risk of developing dementia compared to those who reported none. 36%. That is the size of effect you get from some of the most aggressive pharmaceutical interventions. But this one costs nothing and requires no prescription. Here is the thing. Ikigai in Okinawa is not a philosophy seminar. It is not a journal prompt. It is a physical action taken before 7 a.m. that anchors the day to something concrete. The science behind why that works is 4 biological mechanisms firing at the same time. That is what this video is about, not the concept, but the mechanism. Not the idea, but the protocol. We are going through 3 tiers. Tier 1 is the foundation, something you can start tomorrow morning. Tier 2 is the amplifier, the one that almost every person in the West is accidentally sabotaging right now without knowing it. Tier 3 is the piece nobody in the dementia prevention space is talking about. That is where the ingredient I mentioned becomes clear. That is where the gap between Okinawa and everywhere else finally makes sense. Let's build this properly. The first pillar is the morning anchor. In the research on Okinawan centenarians, one behavioral pattern appeared so consistently that researchers gave it a specific name. They called it purposeful morning engagement. Not morning exercise, not a productivity routine, but purposeful engagement, a specific physical reason to move into the world before breakfast. For many of the centenarians documented in Ogimi, it is a garden. For others, it is preparing something for a neighbor, bringing food or fixing something. The task is small. The biological effect is not. Here is what happens when you wake up with a concrete physical purpose versus waking up without one. When your first stimulus is reactive, the phone, the news, and email, your prefrontal cortex enters what neuroscientists call response mode. It processes incoming information. It answers what arrives. When your first stimulus is intentional, I'm going to check the plants, I'm going to prepare something for someone, your prefrontal cortex enters planning mode. It generates sequences. It anticipates. It decides before anything demands a decision. That distinction matters for one specific reason. Planning mode is the cognitive state that builds reserve. Cognitive reserve is the brain's capacity to absorb damage and keep functioning. The more planning mode activity you accumulate over years and decades, the more structural surplus you carry into old age. This is documented, not theoretical. The Okinawa Gruning study compared brain scans of older Okinawans with older Dutch adults during identical working memory tests. The Okinawan brains showed less activation to complete the same task at the same accuracy level, not because their brains were weaker, but because they were more efficient. They had more reserve. The engine did not have to work as hard to reach the same speed. That reserve accumulates one morning at a time over years, over decades. And the Okinawans who have it did not build it by trying to build it. They built it by doing simple, purposeful things before breakfast as a matter of daily life. The NIH study PubMed reference PMC884687 followed thousands of older Japanese adults in a large prospective cohort. Having ikigai was associated with a 31% lower risk of functional disability and a 36% lower risk of dementia over the follow-up period. Both outcomes share the same single mechanism at the root. Here is the physical test. Not tomorrow, but right now before you finish watching. Think of one specific thing you could do with your hands before you touch your phone tomorrow morning. Not a workout, not a list, but something in the physical world that has a purpose outside yourself. Water 2 plants on a windowsill. Make tea for someone in your house. Walk to the end of the street and back with one destination in mind. One thing, specific and physical, before the phone. If you have that thought clearly right now, you have done the cognitive work Nabi Kenjo does before every sunrise in Ogimi. The difference is she has done it every day for 70 years. That is the foundation. That is tier 1. And I want to be clear, this is about 30% of what the Okinawan morning does to the brain. There are 2 more layers that amplify the effect in ways that are equally biological and equally documented. One of them involves something every adult over 60 in the West is accidentally interrupting every single morning without knowing it. Here is the second pillar. This one surprises people. It starts with a question. What is your brain doing while you sleep? Not during your dreams. In the hours of deep, slow-wave sleep, your brain runs a cleaning cycle. The system responsible is called the glymphatic system. It was not discovered until 2013. Before that, researchers did not know it existed. During deep sleep, your brain cells shrink slightly. The spaces between them expand. Cerebral spinal fluid floods through those spaces and physically flushes out metabolic waste, including 2 proteins you may have heard of, beta amyloid and tau. Those are the proteins that accumulate in Alzheimer's disease. The glymphatic system is your brain's nightly drain. When it runs well, the waste gets cleared. When it runs poorly, the waste builds up quietly over years. Here is where it connects to Okinawa. To run effectively, the glymphatic system needs high-quality deep sleep. To get consistent deep sleep, you need a well-synchronized circadian rhythm. And your circadian rhythm gets reset every single morning by one thing: direct exposure to outdoor light within the first 60 minutes of waking up. Not indoor light, not screens, but outdoor light. The specific wavelengths that hit the retina trigger the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master clock of the brain, to fire the hormonal sequence that will, 14 to 16 hours later, produce the deep sleep the glymphatic system needs. The Blue Zone's researchers documented that nearly every centenarian in Okinawa spends time outside before breakfast. They noted the garden, the social contact, the community structure. All of that is real. But the biological effect that matters most for the aging brain is happening in the retina in the first hour of the day. Okinawans are doing the one thing that ensures the brain gets properly cleaned that night. They are doing it while tending to everything else in their morning: the garden, the neighbor, the food. Here is the modern trap. This is the one I mentioned at the start. The disruption that Western adults create every morning without realizing it. When you wake up and the first thing you reach for is a phone or turn on a television, 2 things happen simultaneously. You delay outdoor light exposure, sometimes by hours, and the artificial light from screens sends a partial signal to the circadian clock that suppresses the morning cortisol peak that is supposed to happen in the first 30 minutes after waking. That peak is not bad stress. It is the hormonal pulse that clears morning fog, activates the system, and starts the chain that ends in deep sleep that night. Interrupt the peak in the morning, and you fragment the deep sleep that night. Run the glymphatic system at reduced capacity, and beta amyloid and tau accumulate. Not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly over years. No supplement addresses this. No diet intervention fixes it because it is not a deficiency. It is a daily structural disruption. Okinawan centenarians never made that disruption, not because they were disciplined, but because it did not exist in their world. Find this in the research under Matthew Walker's work on glymphatic function and sleep architecture, and follow it to the 2021 studies on circadian rhythm disruption and Alzheimer's risk. The line from outdoor morning light to dementia prevention is direct, biological, and almost never discussed in mainstream health content. The Tier 2 protocol is simple. After you identify your physical morning anchor from Tier 1, you do it outside or you step outside for 5 minutes before you do anything else. Not to exercise, not to meditate with intention, just to let outdoor light reach your eyes before any screen does. That single change alters your brain chemistry for the next 16 hours. Now you have 60% of the picture. The third piece is the one that closes both open loops. The one that makes the 1 in 3 dementia rate in Okinawa finally make sense at a systems level. The third pillar is the moai. In Okinawa, a moai is not a wellness concept. It is not a support group you join and leave. It is a specific social institution, a small group of people, usually 4 to 7, who commit to each other for life. They share financial support when someone needs it. They share food. They meet on a schedule that does not change. Many of these groups have been meeting since the members were teenagers. Some of the centenarians in the research cohort had moai relationships spanning 70 years. That is not a social life. That is a committed biological infrastructure. Here is what it does to the brain. The third most potent activator of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, is positive social interaction. BDNF is the protein the brain produces to grow new neurons and strengthen synaptic connections. It is the fertilizer that keeps the brain structurally young. Exercise activates it. Cognitive novelty activates it. And reliable positive human contact activates it. The moai is not a weekly coffee. It is daily or near-daily contact with the same people over decades. That means the brain receives a low-dose, consistent BDNF stimulus every single morning. Not a spike from occasional social events, but a daily drip from a 60-year relationship. The compounding effect on neural maintenance over that time period is not something any drug can replicate. A meta-analysis covering more than 800,000 people found that social isolation increased dementia risk by approximately 50%. That number should be alarming, and yet most public health messaging about dementia focuses on diet, supplements, and cognitive exercises, not the structure of daily human contact. This is the ingredient I opened with at the start. Not turmeric, not omega-3s, not sleep hygiene as a standalone practice. The ingredient is the architecture of your social contact. Whether you have a committed, repeated, reliable human anchor in the first hours of the day. Okinawans did not discover a secret compound. They built a social infrastructure centuries ago that happens to deliver a daily BDNF stimulus at the same time it delivers morning light exposure and prefrontal planning mode activation. All 3 biological levers are pulled simultaneously in the same 15-minute window every morning for decades. That is why the research keeps pointing at lifestyle rather than genetics. It is not one thing, it is the convergence. Remove any one of the 3, and the effect weakens. Keep all 3 together and you get what the brain scans showed. Now, the Okinawa grooming finding I held back. When researchers put older Okinawans and older Dutch adults in brain scanners and gave them identical memory tasks, they expected healthier Okinawan brains to show more activity, more connectivity, more activation. That is what healthy usually looks like in neuroimaging. What they found was the opposite. The Okinawan brains showed less activation to complete the same task at the same accuracy. The interpretation was precise. These brains had accumulated decades of cognitive reserve. They were running on surplus. The same task that required full engagement from a Western brain required only partial engagement from an Okinawan brain. That surplus does not come from brain training. It comes from 70 years of purposeful mornings stacked on top of each other. Planning mode, prefrontal activation, circadian protected glymphatic cleaning, and daily BDNF from a committed social structure. Every morning, every year, every decade. Here is the inversion I mentioned in the second loop. Why this reverses the process. Most dementia prevention thinking is reparative. Take this to reduce inflammation. Do these exercises to slow decline. Compensate for what is already going wrong. The Okinawan model is not reparative. It is generative. The morning ritual does not slow a decline. It builds a surplus, a reserve that accumulates for decades before it is ever needed. By the time a Western adult begins worrying about cognitive decline at 70, the Okinawan has been depositing into that account every morning since 30. That is the gap, not genetics, not geography. Decades of compounding morning deposits starting at 60 still matters. The brain responds to these inputs at any age with a functioning brain. BDNF responds to social contact at 90. The glymphatic system responds to circadian alignment at 80. The prefrontal cortex builds reserve from purposeful engagement at 65. The account is never closed. Here is the complete integrated system, all three tiers running together. Every morning before you touch a phone or screen, you do one physical thing with your hands that has a purpose for someone or something outside yourself. You do it outside or you step outside for 5 minutes first, and you do it alongside or immediately followed by real contact with one consistent person. Not a text, but a voice, a presence, the same person, the same general window of time on a schedule that holds. That is the adapted Moai. It does not require a formal institution. It requires a decision made once and then kept. At 7 days, the morning feels more grounded. Not dramatic, just settled in a way it was not before. At 30 days, the social anchor shifts from effort to expectation. Your system begins anticipating the contact before it happens. That anticipation is the BDNF response activating in advance. The biology is already running. At 90 days, all three tiers are running simultaneously and naturally. You are doing what the centenarians in Ogimi have been doing since before the research started, not as a protocol, but as a life. Here is the full picture, plainly stated. Okinawans do not have a secret supplement for the brain. They have a morning structure that activates 4 cognitive protection mechanisms at the same time. Cortisol regulation through purposeful engagement, glymphatic cleaning through circadian reset from morning light, BDNF stimulation through daily committed social contact, prefrontal reserve building through physical intentional action before the world makes demands. They do not schedule these separately. They do not optimize them. They converge naturally in the same 15-minute window every morning outside with another person doing something with their hands. 4 mechanisms, 1 window. Decades of compounding. In the West, we have dismantled each one without noticing. First stimulus is reactive. First light is artificial. First social contact is a text hours later. The 4 mechanisms never fire together. And by the time the gap becomes visible in a clinic, it has been accumulating quietly for 20 years. What you do tomorrow is this. Before you touch your phone, do one physical thing for someone or something outside yourself. Step outside for 5 minutes. Make real contact with one consistent person. That is tier 1. Everything else builds from there, and the building is faster than you think. One question for the comments. What is the first thing you do tomorrow morning before anything else? Not what you want it to be, but what it actually is right now. Drop it below. The pattern across thousands of answers is always more revealing than any study. The morning is not a preparation for the day. It is the practice that builds the brain you will rely on at 85. If this story changes how you view your morning routine and the future of your brain, please subscribe and like the channel. We are uncovering the history and science they tried to bury. Plant the seeds for your future. The next treasure will be revealed soon.